Okay, let's go ahead and get started here. Thanks for coming to today's office hours. So let's jump right in. You guys know what to do. Hit that questions box on the right-hand side. If you don't see it, hit that little orange arrow at the top right of your screen to expand your dashboard there. And then go ahead and ask away. I've just got a couple questions in the queue. By all means, ask away. All right, so let's get into the first one here. A couple that were emailed earlier. Okay, so this question has to deal with working with another agent and sharing commissions. So we've got Sylvia here. So I have an agent in mind to share commissions on a lead for a small commercial strip property. Both of us attained our license at about the same time. However, the other agent has closed about 5 to 8 commercial deals and several residential deals. I have not closed any commercial deals. I've closed several residential deals only. So the buyer is interested in purchasing the small commercial strip in hopes of seller financing. The seller, buyer, and us two agents are supposed to meet. The elderly seller may be interested in selling other properties as well. If the buyer's plan does come through, my hope is that the other agent and I will obtain the listings from the seller's other properties. Seems reasonable. So what would be considered a fair commission split in such a situation? I know most are 50-50 for a residential listing, but maybe it's not the same for a commercial deal. I am a very fair person, but I don't want to feel that I'm being taken advantage of either. Yeah, that's the biggest thing when it comes to sharing clients and deals is feeling like you're not being taken advantage of or not taking advantage of the other person. So I would say with that, one of the first things that we need to figure out is we need to clearly define who is going to do what for this transaction. So it's probably good to have some discussions beforehand before you meet the buyer and the seller in the same room and really get on the same page and figure out who is going to do what. Or are you going to work, so are you going to work together on the letter of intent? Are you going to work together on the contract? Are you going to work together on due diligence items, opening escrow? Who's going to handle inspections? Who's going to handle disclosures? Who's going to handle primary phone calls to the buyer and to the seller? Who's going to take a lead on that? So one of the problems with working with another person in the deal is sometimes if you don't have that communication, that's just you're on the same page with the agent. I mean, sometimes you have to be on the same page every hour or so because things can change. And if you got your friend agent who just called the seller and said, hey, this just happened, but you already talked to that client 3 hours earlier about the same conversation. So it gets repetitive and it can be kind of a pain on the receiving end when you've got multiple chiefs, right? So that's probably the biggest thing. But as far as 50-50 is concerned, that's probably reasonable, and it sounds like you may kind of feel like you're the junior agent on this deal just because you don't have the experience from the commercial deals. And they've got a little bit more commercial experience. So the 50-50 is probably good for you. It may not be as good for them, but you both are still kind of in a learning environment and atmosphere and mindset. So it's probably good to work together on this deal. Now, if it were something like you were the really experienced agent and you were trying to bring in, or another agent brought you in on a deal and they didn't really have any clue, then 50-50 for you may not be advantageous. But if you're more of a junior agent, that would be more advantageous because you can gleam off them as kind of like a mentor. But just be sure that you are clearly defining what each of you is doing, and literally have daily meetings about this particular transaction if it goes through. If you start negotiating and stuff, just be on the same page, have each other on speed dial. You really want to manage that communication part. So, and as far as the other deals that eventually come out of it, that's great. But again, you want to make sure that you've got an understanding on the front end. So if this particular seller does list any additional properties, are you going to split them 50-50 from here on out? How are you going to work the buyers that come from these leads, or these, the buyer leads that come from the listings? Who's going to work what? How are you going to decide that? So are you going to alternate working leads? Are you going to split anything that comes your way as far as buyers are concerned? And then referrals from this particular seller. Look forward into the future and say, okay, if we do a good job for the seller, what's going to happen, or what's most likely going to happen, and how can we use this particular contact to generate more business out of, right? So you just want to get clear on the front end of, okay, that's great. After this transaction, what's going to happen? Whose seller leads are these going to? Whose buyer leads are these going to? And if you work the buyer, again, the buyer could lead into future business. So is everything tied to the 50-50, or is it something different? And I personally have dealt with this before, and it's pretty hard to manage, and a couple of deals have blown up and got a little ugly as far as working with the other agents, just because we didn't have clear communication on the front end, and it ended up causing bad feelings. So I can tell you from experience that that's something you really want to hammer out on the front end. So I hope this answers your question. But yeah, 50-50 is fine. It's pretty much the same as residential when it comes to splits. But if you were to call an outside broker and try to share a deal, they're probably not going to do it. And if they will do it, it's probably going to be, okay, refer me the business, and then I will do it. So another point, what you could even do is, and I'm not sure who has the buyer and who has the seller. Obviously, probably one of you came up with the seller lead, and the other one came up with the buyer lead, or maybe you have both, or they have both. So you need to figure out who kind of, for lack of a better term, who owns that particular client, right? And then where's the leverage? So if it's your buyer and it's your seller and you're looking for them for help, is 50-50 reasonable? So I guess I don't know that, so I'm not really sure. Those are just some of the questions that I would ask about that. And if you have any other comments, and I believe you are driving now, so if you want to follow up with this, go ahead and send me some more information on the email when you get back, and we'll go from there. Okay, so I think that handles the first question. Let's go to the second question regarding due diligence. Okay. So, is there a preference as to who should submit due diligence questions, the agent or the agent's attorney? And I'm not really sure what you mean by that. So Brian, let me know. Give me a little backstory on this particular deal. Are you working the buyer? Are you working the seller? And then the agent's attorney. You probably don't have an attorney working on the behalf of a client. The client probably has their own attorney. Is that what you mean? Just give me a little clarification on that, and I'll move on to your second point here. Oh, it looks like, okay, so is dual agency more problematic in commercial than residential? Okay, maybe, so in regards to the last, I'm guessing this is in regards to the last question, it can be a little sticky. One way that you can help with that is if for that last transaction, if if agent A wants to work with the buyer and agent B wants to work with the seller, and then kind of work at it from that angle, that's another option. Instead of working 50-50 on the buy side and 50-50 on the sell side, you could kind of split it up. But if you're under the same brokerage and the same company, then it's going to be dual agent. But you could run into problems, but you're probably about the same as far as problematic. It's not ideal because, again, it's how do you be fiduciary to both sides, right? Which is a tough question to answer. I don't know if there is a right or wrong answer. It's just a matter of judgment. Okay, so yeah, so the client buyer has an attorney. Okay, thank you, Brian. So is there a preference as to who should submit the due diligence questions? So I'm guessing maybe you're at the letter of intent stage, or you're even in the contract stage, and you're looking for due diligence. Who's going to ask all the questions? Well, you should. Again, this comes with experience from doing deals. That's when you're going to learn kind of what questions to ask. But you could start with the disclosure items and the different forms. So if you're using like AIR forms, there's a disclosure in there, and they reference one called the property information sheet. And then there's the seller's mandatory disclosure statement. And those have like required questions for the seller about the particular property. And the seller's mandatory disclosure, I believe that's required, and then the property information sheet, that's kind of a referenced disclosure form within the AIR forms contract. But again, this will help ask those questions, because I'm guessing since you're in due diligence, you want to know about as much as you can about the property. So this is where you've got the paper questions, the questions that you need to answer on paper, and then you've got the real world questions. And I'm hoping that you glean some stuff off of the training materials. But if there's certain things, if you've got certain questions about due diligence items, let me know which specifically that you're looking at. But you should be, as the agent, you should be asking the questions. The client's attorney, if they have an attorney, they may ask questions as well, but they're really not in that role. They may be asking questions about the contract itself, and maybe some of the deal points that they can formulate into the agreement. But what they're most likely looking for as the attorney is, how's the contract look, right? As opposed to business terms, as opposed to negotiation, as opposed to specifics of the property, other than what's mandatory. So I guess I would ask, what capacity is this attorney dealing with? Are they dealing with the entire transaction? Are they dealing with just a contract? That kind of thing. But that should fall on your shoulders as the agent, because that's what you are required to do. With regard to history, how far back is reasonable and customary when it comes to income and expense information? It's typically 2 years, 2 full years. So since we're in the end of 2016, generally you would have a 2015 and a 2014 annual income statement, something like that, and then a year-to-date income statement, if they can prepare that. And if you can't get a year-to-date income statement, at least get something so you can see. And if it's a sophisticated owner, they may have a CPA or at least a property manager, perhaps, depending on the property type, where they can get you either a ledger so you can put one together yourself, or that they can put together a current year-to-date income statement. But generally 2 years is what you're going to be looking for. And if you're towards the end of 2016, so if we're like in December, you can most likely get away with the 2015 and 2016 if that 2016 is done right away. Oh, what is an AIR form? Okay, so let me put this in the chat, the link here. I believe it's this. So look in your chat, AIREA. So if we go to, so AIR is, it used to stand for something, now it's just, they just go by AIR. But again, it says it's the nation's largest and most recognized organization for industrial and commercial real estate brokers. And basically what they do is they give you different forms. So you can, it's not like a subscription base where it's a monthly thing, but it's almost like on a token system where you purchase tokens and certain forms are worth X tokens. But let me give you an example. So they've got a whole bunch of different forms, and I'm hoping that you can see my screen here still. So let me just go through and find out where my AIR forms is, and I'll pull it up and kind of show you what they give you. Maybe it's this one. Oh, here it is. Let's go. I guess they go by WinAir. All right. So let me show you. So you go to load new forms, and they give you different forms for different purposes. So you've got industrial and commercial, you've got lease forms, you've got addendas, you got office lease and retail lease. So this is primarily the main folder here. So let's see, counteroffers, exclusive listing agreements, sublease, lease, sale or lease. Seller's mandatory disclosure statement, like I mentioned earlier, the property information sheet, standard estoppel certificates, purchase and sale agreements for, they even got residential, which is residential income properties, vacant land, and then normal. So you've got normal purchase agreements here that you can go into. And what's cool about these forms is, unlike if you're using like zip forms or something, you can actually go in and edit these. So, and not just in the spots where you've got the underlined. So I could go in here and say, I could go into purchase price, the purchase price to be paid by, and I can add all sorts of different text in here, and it'll save it, which is cool. And then I can plug it into the box. But it's basically the commercial, it's a standardized commercial contracts system that is pretty much universally accepted across the country, with the exception of if you're dealing with like CBRE on the list side, then they have like their own set of contracts that they'll want to use. And again, you just need to read them. But this is like the zip form or WinForms version for commercial, and this one is probably, I want to say, if I were to publish this one, actually save it or print it, then it's going to charge me tokens, so it might cost me 50 cents or $1 per contract. And then different forms cost different amount of tokens, so you can buy like 100 tokens for 50 bucks. And then you just go through it. So it says up at the top left of my screen, I've got 34 tokens remaining. So if you're going into a contract, you don't necessarily need an attorney to write up a contract. You just go into here and use an AIR form. But you could go here to the property information sheet. So this one, material physical defects, equipment, soil conditions, utilities, insurance, and basically this one says owner has no actual knowledge of any insurance claims, blah, blah, blah. The owner has no actual knowledge of this. So this is a This is one of the disclosures that's within the contract that it references. So if you're not using an AIR form, it's not going to reference this particular document. But this is a nice little disclosure: fire damage, actions, suits, or proceedings, etc., etc. And then you've got the seller's mandatory disclosure statement. So we've got the earthquake safety, seismic hazards, natural hazard, flood if it's in a flood zone, fire, mold, water heater bracing, certain things. And again, it disclaims right at the front: do not use this form with regard to the sale of residential properties. Let's see here. Okay, so I have a buyer interested in a 16-unit apartment building in a rough area. Is the owner agent required to disclose police activity in the building and surrounding areas? That is a good question. I haven't seen that in the AIR contracts, or I haven't seen that in other contracts or any commercial disclosures. But if you're in a rough area, you probably just want to mention to the buyer that, you know, this isn't a rough area. You're probably going to have crime. You can certainly look at well, here where I live, we've got a website you can go to look at the crime. I think it's on the maybe it's on the sheriff's website. But you could Google your city or county and just say, you know what, if you're worried about the crime, go ahead and look into it. But Brian, I don't believe that's a disclosable thing unless there was, like, if you feel like you should disclose it, disclose it. If you feel kind of up in the air about disclosing something, it's probably better just to disclose it anyway. If it's in a rough area, the buyer's already going to know it's in a rough area unless they're out of the area and they're not really sure what's going on, in which case you want to be their advisor and let them know, hey, you know, this thing is, this property is in a rough area, if they don't know it. So, but as far as, I don't believe so. If you have that attorney, if that attorney is on this deal and they've already been, if they've already been brought in, you may want to ask them if there's any issue with that, but I've never seen that before. And Brian, I'm going to look into that because I'd like to learn that myself. So I'm just making a note here. Okay. And are air forms free? No, they cost, I think it's like $50 for 100 tokens. And then if you're brand new to set up, I think it's like $125 or $75. I can't remember which it is to get actually set up and get the application installed on your computer. It's a desktop program, so it's not like a cloud program. It actually installs on your computer. Imagine that. We still have those kind of programs out there. And again, let me just go back to the website here so you can get the URL. So airea.com. And then if you just go membership, it should give you an idea. Firm broker agent membership. Click here for membership requirements and applications. You can also give them a call. I've called them up a few times. They're in California, I believe. Yeah. So you could even just go down here to the bottom and just give them a call and say, hey, what's it take to get set up, and do you have specific forms for your state? Because they also have, if you're in California, they've got certain contracts that are specifically for California, I believe, and then they have some that are specific for other areas, and then they've got like the general contracts. So you can just ask them, give them a call, ask them your questions, but it's really inexpensive. And then you can actually prepare documents for free, but they'll be watermarked with draft on them, so you can print out as much as you want and practice and fill them out as much as you want. And then when you're finally ready to publish the form, so that when you actually want to have a buyer or seller sign something, you just pay for the tokens, which are already prepaid. Actually, you just use your tokens, and then you can download them without the watermark on there. But it's really inexpensive, and it's probably a must-have. It's a must-have resource for you for commercial. Okay, thanks, Brian. I got your next question. So I have a likely deal with a 3-story building where the top 2 floors are apartments, and the first floor is currently a retail florist. Since no one is likely to continue that business, what kind of business is an appraiser likely to assume will be in that space in order to establish a reasonable valuation? The first thing that I would do is go to the planning or zoning department for whichever county you're in, and I would just look at the use. It'll give you a code as to what types of businesses are there, and if you are a member of the realtor organization, if you go to, I think it's NARRPR, so NAR's property resource, what's it called that? I think it's NPRRPR.com. I believe that's what it is. Let me send that out. And they'll actually do, what's cool is they can actually do an analysis based on your location and show you what businesses are in the area and which ones are not in the area, and you can actually figure out what kind of tenant may be a good fit for that particular thing. Yeah, realtor property resource, that's right. So, and if you're a realtor, it's free. So definitely check that out. But as far as valuation, if it's, they're probably just going to look at a market type of price per foot for that lease rate. So, if it's 2,000 square feet, they're going to look at similar properties and similar lease rates and just assign it kind of an average value for that particular space. So they're not going to look at, okay, so a retail florist was in here previously, it's going to be another retail florist. They're probably not going to do that. They're probably going to look and say, okay, what's an average lease rate that we can assign, assuming that this property will be leased up shortly. So they'll do that analysis on there. Unless it's been vacant for a long time, in which case they may not assign a leased or come up with an average leasing value, but this one has been, so it's likely that another tenant will go in there. So I hope that answered that particular question. But yeah, they're not going to look at a specific business unless it's like something that is built out specifically for that use, like a restaurant. If it was built out for a restaurant, then they're probably going to look at a restaurant average lease rate to go in. If it's built out like a bank and it's got certain security features, and again, they may look at what are other banks leasing for. But a standard build out like a florist is probably just going to warrant an average lease rate. And you can probably figure that out as well by just looking up LoopNet or CoStar and then looking for the forward lease data on current listings, and then kind of get a feel for what the asking rates are. And then you'll be able to kind of figure out, okay, 2,000 square feet, now it's about $1 a square foot, so on and so forth, and plug that in. But the appraiser, it's good that the appraiser is doing that. If you're in contract, and it sounds like you are probably in, well, you may be in contract on that deal, but it's always great when you've got an appraiser in there giving valuation. It can give you some backup and give your client a real strong sense of the value, not just from a broker perspective. Okay. Hi, Steve. I was driving. Hello, Sylvia. I parked for a few minutes. Back to my question that you had questions on. The buyer is my contact. The buyer wanted to meet again. First meeting was in March. I invited the in-house agent. Okay, the buyer's second meeting with me a couple weeks ago. It was suggested that the buyer and seller meet us agents together. Seller does not have a representative and supposedly wanted buyer to obtain a fair price for property to sell to the buyer. Buyer awaiting this for seller to schedule next meeting. Okay. First things first. If the buyer, let's see, who wants to meet? So if the seller wants to meet the buyer, as they always do, I would say first of all, before you all meet in the same room, the buyer and the seller and the agent, I would say get some sort of a single party listing agreement or a buyer representation agreement if you can. Because the last thing you want is for the buyer to meet with the seller and then they decide that they don't need you to, and then they go work out something together without having to pay an agent fee of 4, 5, 6% or whatever it may be. So that's a motivation for some sellers and buyers is, believe it or not, to cut the agent out. So I would say number one, protect yourself first. Once you get that, then I would say, yeah, let's all meet in a room and try to figure out something as far as price. Now that may go a little that may be a little awkward if you haven't done that particular strategy before. Again, having all parties in one room could be difficult, but if you're good with managing people, that may be a good option. AAR forms, are these used primarily for reps who are not affiliated with the MLS system? Yes, and no. They offer another set of forms. They're some, I guess you would call similar to like the zip forms that are like the residential forms, but then they offer like 5 or 6 commercial forms. They're different, but you can read them both and kind of compare. But AAR is specifically for commercial deals, whether or not you are affiliated with an MLS or not. Obtain buyer-sell agreement. Got it. I was wondering if this could happen. Listen to us, then cut out agents. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's exactly what can happen. It hasn't happened to me, but I've heard it happening to agents that I know. Again, you've got to have that dual agency kind of role, and then you've got to have one or both of those clients in that mentality that they either despise agents or don't trust agents, and then that's when the situation can go bad. But most people, I think, are pretty honorable, but it's always good to protect yourself. And yes, I've managed buyer-seller in the same room. Perfect. So I hope I answered that for you, Sylvia. If not, just let me know. But let me just read over your question, make sure I got it. Okay, I guess you really didn't have too much of a question, just more of a backstory on that. Okay, cool. Okay, does Zip Forms offer the same kinds of forms as AAR forms? It's like I said, like there's like a handful of forms that would be considered comparable, right? They're going to have Zip Forms. I think has a commercial purchase agreement. They've got a vacant land purchase agreement. They may have even a lease agreement. I don't use Zip Forms, so I don't know. But I just remember from when I was using Zip Forms back a couple years ago, they had a few forms, but AAR forms, I mean, you've got, no, where is it? Let me see here. I mean, you've got all sorts of forms, and zip forms is not going to have all that AIR forms has. I would say AIR form probably has like 9 or 10 times the forms that zip forms has. You know, like counter offers, yeah, you're going to have the same thing. Estoppel certificates, yeah, they're probably going to have that. Standard offer agreement and escrow instructions, yeah. The good thing about I would say both of these contracts, both zip form commercial contracts and AIR form contracts, is that they're very even as far as even on the seller and the buyer side, right? They're not real strong for the seller, or they're not real strong for the buyer. They're fairly equal contracts for both parties. Where you start seeing the disparagement is when you see like you know, maybe it's like an in-house contract or an attorney written contract working on behalf of their client. They're going to put in some more favorable terms towards their client. But this is one of the good things about using one of these forms is they're very even. They're not biased at all. And these forms have, you know, consumer protections. Kind of, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we like to use them is they cover everything and they're not really missing much. But they're not ideal for all situations because if you're dealing with something like a business and real estate purchase, you're going to have something. You're going to need something custom. I mean, you can add line items and you can add paragraphs, but when you start adding pages and pages and pages and you're contradicting things throughout the paragraphs in your addenda, it just gets real complicated. In which case, a more complicated deal may warrant a custom attorney drawn contract. But as you can see on my screen, I'm sure you've probably read all these, but you've got amendments to represent owner and sale for lease, exclusive rights, and then let's go back to another one. You've got leases. Okay, so we've got a counteroffer for lease, for the lessee, for the lessor, multi-tenant lease gross, multi-tenant lease net. Remember from all of our different lease types. Single tenant gross, single tenant net lease. So remember we're talking about single tenant triple net leases, right? So you would use this form right here. Boom. Let's see, standard sublease, long form, multi-tenant form, short form, standard lease addendum. Remember we talked about guarantees and guarantors. Well, here's a guarantee. Lease abstracts, addendums, notice to perform, cost of, what was it? Rent adjustments, option to purchase, first right of refusals, tenant applications, work letter. This is probably a tenant improvement work letter. Service agreements, earthquake hazard. So you've got a lot of different options, and they're tailored specifically for commercial. You've got office leases and multi-tenant office gross leases and net leases. So they get real specific. You're not going to find the specificity in the zip forms. And then standard retail lease, you've got percentage rents, standard multi-tenant shopping center lease net, right? So you've got a lot of different options here. So honestly, it's worth it. It's like 125 bucks I think to get started, and then you can buy tokens for 100 tokens for 50 bucks or something if you run out, and it can last you 6 months, 12 months, depends on how often you use them. But yeah, I would say it's definitely needed. Okay, going back here to the questions. Okay, got it about air forms. As far as I've reviewed the CAR forms, I only saw one single commercial form. Okay, so CAR, so that is Commercial Association of Realtors. Okay, so you only saw one commercial form. Yeah. And certain things may work for commercial, such as tenant estoppels and more generic forms. But yeah, doesn't give you a lot of options now, does it? Okay, yes, you have answered my questions and gave me a lot of good guidance. Thank you. Cool. Appreciate it. Thanks, Sylvia. And have you heard if a broker has a problem with using AAR forms versus CAR forms? Meaning your actual managing broker. I guess you could ask them, but when I was at KW, we didn't. There was no issue. It was what's your best judgment, basically, is what the advice was. But yeah, AAR forms are pretty they're pretty solid. So your broker probably shouldn't have a problem with them, but you can always ask just to make sure. We'll disconnect in a couple of minutes. Thanks a bunch, Steve. Perfect. Glad I could help. But the good news is, what I'm seeing here is some deals coming together, or at least, we're getting some leads. We're getting some traction here, and traction is always fantastic. So I'm glad to see that we're getting some questions about real deals here. As far as with the multi-level mixed use building, or the working the buyer and the seller on a retail strip center. This is awesome that we're having these conversations, because it means you guys are taking action and generating leads and starting to put deals together, which is awesome. And then once you start closing your first few deals, it's going to give you a whole lot of confidence moving forward. Can you comment on Reis data? Not sure the spelling. Yeah, it's R-E-I-S. Yeah, Reis is good. I probably have some samples on it, but it's really thorough. I mean, you can get these reports from Reis, and they're like, you can get them 10, 15, 20 pages. They have great breakdowns as far as price per foot and lease rates and trends and what's going on in the local market, because they break down based upon the local markets. Within reason, they're not going to cover a lot of tertiary markets, but they're going to cover primary and a lot of secondary markets, and then you can choose between, do you want the retail report, do you want the multifamily, do you want the office, do you want the industrial reports. But they're a good resource. Last I checked, they're a little expensive. I want to say they were a little over $100 a month, and they came out with quarterly reports. And maybe they actually billed quarterly. It's been a couple years since I've looked at the billing. One of my other partners handles the billing for that particular resource, but I think it's REIS reports. If you just Google it or check on our resources tab, I think we've got a link to it. Oh, $125 a month. Okay, so I was close. But yeah, it's great, and you can definitely try it. I don't think they lock you in for a year unless you pay for a year up front at a discount, but they do have pretty good reports. I wonder if I have one. Let me see if I've got one on my computer. I might have one. The Reis Observer. Okay. Sacramento. Oh, Jesus is old. Okay, so this is just a. Okay, so this is like a trend report. So they've got like trend reports, and then they've got like specific reports where they really get down into the nitty gritty on the details. But this is just the Reis Observer. So they talk about employment. Oh my gosh. Hold on one sec. So Bureau of Labor Statistics, talking about economic growth, employment outlook. So this is one they did for Sacramento. Little old Sacramento, which is a secondary market, the capital of the biggest, one of the biggest economies in the world, and we're still a secondary market. But I'm not bitter. All right, office again. So, these are just kind of an overview report here, what they predicted in the future. Actually, looking back, I wonder if they were correct on their predictions. But this is one form of their report. But they've got more specific reports. I wonder if there's another sample Reese report. Maybe that's... Okay, so here's the actual metro analysis for an apartment here in Sacramento. So again, talking about asking rates and vacancy rates, overviews. I'm not sure if I showed you this before, guys, or not, but it shows change over time. But you can get into some really nitty-gritty details, which is great to attach to like your listing presentation. And if they, if they want to become clients of yours and they sign the listing agreement, you can maybe give them a copy of this. But if they're not going to become your client, maybe you don't want to give them to them. That's up to you. But this will arm you with some data, so you can see where the market is going, so that you can actually communicate to that to your clients. But they've got some, again, nice charts and stuff, and you can even brand it. This one isn't. Oh yeah, this one is branded. So you can have them branded with your logo and stuff, which again makes you look great. But this thing's like 17 pages. Market absorption, all sorts of fun stuff. And yeah, you can also use another free source that's like Reese Reports, and I think I mentioned it beforehand, was IRR.com. Actually, no, it's research.irr.com, but you can find it by just looking. It's Integra Realty Resources. They're a large commercial appraiser firm, and they've got different publications and stuff. So we got midpoint 2016. I think you just need to enter your email and name, maybe a phone number, but they don't call you. Property reports, local market reports. And this is all free. This used to be in more of a booklet form, a magazine form that they would give to their own people, but it looks like they've made it public within the last year or so. So you can search all reports here. So you can look at previous years or the current mid-year. So I want the viewpoint, which has everything, or if I want to just look at multifamily, and then I can search my location. And I was looking for New Jersey. NJ. Where is NJ? Oh, I'm sad there's no New Jersey. Huh. Okay, well maybe this may not work for everyone, but if it has your market in here, you can look at it. So Seattle multifamily. Oh, it's making me give all my contact information. They're trying to lead capture me and turn me into a customer, but I don't think I've ever got an email from them. So I don't know what the point is if you're going to collect name and email information if you're not going to actually communicate with the person. What's the point other than to sell your information? I don't know, but you can enter them and get the free reports. And it's very similar to Reese Reports. It may not go into quite the detail of Reese Reports, but it's free 99. Okay. Okay, so in my area there are plenty of good deals that go unreported. Is there a good way to find the specifics? So there are plenty of deals that go unreported. Well, if they're not reported, meaning the big reporter of deals is going to be CoStar, because they usually call on all of the listings that are on LoopNet and CoStar and get the information and try to update them. And if the agent refuses to update CoStar, the odds of getting that information are going to be slim to none unless you call that agent specifically and say, hey, you just closed this deal. I've got a similar situation. What can you tell me as far as the price or the net operating income or cap rate or anything like that? Try to get an idea. That's probably the only way to do it, because if they're not willing to give it to CoStar, they're probably not willing to give it out. You could look for the public records, but they don't always disclose that. They don't always record that information on the public databases. But that's a good question. But you may not be able to find the specifics. It's just like that house that was like over $200 million. Was it $200 million house in Southern California that sold what 3 or 4 or 5 years ago? It was like I think it was a Spelling Mansion. They just disclosed that it was somewhere over. I can't remember if it was $100 million or $200 million. It is over that price, but then it was undisclosed as far as what the actual price was. So you may have a situation like that. What's the difference between a net present value and an internal rate of return, NPV, versus an IRR? That is a monster of a question. So how would I even answer that? Well, we're looking at rates of return over a period of time, basically. And then the NPV, I believe, is a. Now I'm not 100% on the net present value and the internal rates of return. I've studied it, and it's still kind of confusing. But if you use like REA-Wise or Property Metrics, they have this functionality that will tell you what they are, but it has to depend on what you plug in for the discount rate, and so there's a lot involved with these two. One of the resources I go to is Property Metrics. They have a software service. And so they actually have they've got a cool database of math calculations. So when I'm unsure about a certain math calculation, I go here. So let's see, this one is on modified internal rates of return. Let's see. But it has to do with the cash flow table, and it's quite the topic. We're actually in the process of creating a module 6 for the program, and it's on the financial aspects, and we're gonna touch on the internal rates of return. It's not used very often with what we deal with our investors, but it's mostly dealt with asset managers when they're looking at portfolios and trying to figure out when strategically the company wants to sell based upon what they believe the discount rate to be. I'm trying to find where you can opt in. So if you want to opt in here, you can go to subscribe, and I'll just plug this in. Actually, a CRE investment analysis. So if you just go to propertymetrics.com/blog, you can sign up, and they'll actually email you. It's like a 5-day course on just analysis, which is great. But yeah, the IR and net present value is a beast of a topic there. Yeah, there's a lot of private deals that are done. But you just try to get the best information that you can. You can't get everything. You just do the best and try to research as much as you can. But if any, and they, if you're dealing with a seller or something, and they say, well, what about this property that sold for X dollars that wasn't online, or you can't find it, but they have insider information? Well, that's great. Always keep an open mind and listen. But I hope that kind of answers the questions. Anything else, guys? And we just got a couple of seconds left here, so if you've got something, let me know real quick. It is 12:03. Okay, I believe that's all we've got for today. I want to thank you guys for coming. All right, see you later, guys.